Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first leadership book of the month for 2023. Hey, Brett and Dave.
Hey there, Kelly. Hey, Brett.
And everybody watching. Welcome, everyone watching now or watching on the video. Today's book is Extreme Ownership, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But how about an update? Brett, you want to do an update first?
Sure, do a little intro and update.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm personally energized to continue my personal growth and development as we share the insights and learnings with everybody that's on the broadcast. So as Kelly said, my name is Bret Getzel. I'm the COO of a Kansas City-based broadline distribution company and support several other client partners aligning their supply with demand as it relates to protein and specifically with pork. So 32 years this year marks in the industry, and people always say I'm far from done. So I was kind of benchmarking that. And we did the Earn Life, which was Marshall Goldsmith's book last year. And so I Googled, how old is Marshall Goldsmith? 73. So, and he's still really, really going strong and really a prolific poster and he's very impactful in the social media space. And then I'm a big fan of Brian Tracy's as well. Believe it or not, Brian Tracy's 79 and still going really, really strong. So, I don't know that I'll go quite as long as either one of those two, but they're kind of setting the standard for what's considered the exit point. But so if that's the case, a couple decades to go.
Yeah, I bet you will. Dave, how about you?
Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Dave Lingerfelt, healthcare educator. Here we are back in, start of the new year, which is also the start of a new semester. So always excited to see new students coming into the classroom as we kick off another semester. The fullest my classroom has since we started talking about COVID. So it's kind of nice to have a classroom just full of students. And the benefit of teaching, talking about technology is there's always something new to talk about. So new semester, talking about new technology and kick off another one. So looking forward to our discussion today. This is one of my favorite books I read a long time ago and actually got to read it again as we kind of prep this. So I'm really excited about today's discussion.
All right. And I'm Kelly Byrnes, the host of this, and very excited to get to share this with everyone. My update is, we all know each other through Rockhurst. So I'm an adjunct at Rockhurst, and Brett got his MBA at Rockhurst, and so did I years ago. But I was one of Brett's professors, and then Dave is a professor at Rockhurst University in Kansas City. So we have the Rockhurst University connection. Go Hawks! Hey, shout out if you're here. Somebody did post. Let's see. Magda's here. Thanks, Magda. Yeah, if you're here, give us a shout out. We can see your comments, but we can't post back to the live version right now. But we'll look for those later. And but if you have a question or comment, please do post. And I lead Voyage Consulting Group, and we do consulting and coaching in the leadership and company culture space. And my update since last month is that I got the printer proof for the Earned Life workbook. So Brett mentioned Marshall Goldsmith and the Earned Life. We did this book in August, and I really wanted a workbook to accompany the book, and there wasn't one. So I reached out and offered to create it. So collaborated with Marshall Goldsmith on that workbook. So it'll be live pretty soon. So very exciting. So good way to kick off the year. And we created this this forum together as a way to encourage leaders to continue their development and growth. And every book talks about that, including this one. There was one line toward the very end where he said, it might have been even in the appendix, actually, where he talked about continue your development. And he said, read what's out there and get your basics. And that adds to what you know for common sense. So we want to inspire and encourage leaders to continue their development and growth. And make it easy for you to do it by joining us for these conversations. And they're scheduled out for 2023. So join us every month on the fourth Thursday of each month. Okay, so today's, Brett, do you want to share some other stuff before we go into this book?
Sure. So throughout the month, I read all kinds of different things in addition to this book and other books. And I happened to come across the Tony Robbins piece, which was related to New Year's resolutions. And I think the commonly accepted statistic is 95% of New Year's resolutions, I think, are abandoned in the first month. They don't even make it to the first month. So his sentiment, which I think is spot on. He said, New Year's resolutions are nothing more than intentions. They're feelings. And then I had the thought, imagine if we in the professional space we didn't do budgeting and we didn't do strategic planning and we just made resolutions. And obviously we know that wouldn't be very successful. So it begs the question, why do we think that that's going to be successful in our personal life? And obviously it's not. So if you think about it, right, and you say to yourself, well, instead of having New Year's resolutions, I'm going to have New Year's plans with goals and objectives, the likelihood that you're going to follow through on that is probably pretty high. So, Kelly always challenges us to say, well, how is this really playing out in your life? And I had to really stop and reflect on that. And am I walking the talk, so to speak? So I look back and in 2021, I had set this personal goal of riding this 80-mile bike ride, a fundraiser bike ride in Lawrence, Kansas. And I had a goal, right? And I followed through on it. I rode. I was pretty diligent in my training. I was very dedicated. And October came around, the date, and I went and I did it. Now, last year, 2022, I didn't have a goal. Didn't have a plan. I said, well, I still enjoy riding and it's still beneficial for my health and wellness. And I didn't get near as much done. So 2023, here we are, new year. And I said, well, we're going to do it differently. So I've set a goal. I'm obviously exhibiting that in the public space here, which Dr. Cialdini calls that social proof. And I'm going to ride 4,100 miles this year. I've got it all planned out. I've got it marked out by the week. It sounds like a big number, but when you lay it out week by week, it's really not that daunting. And I'm committing to completing a century ride, which I think will take place sometime in September. So given that fact that we're going to be together here, month after month, I'll give everybody an update on how we progress. But I'm pretty excited about that. But the takeaway, of course, was this idea of, why New Year's resolutions really fail. So I did share, and this is probably the most exciting thing I'll share today. I did share that the CEO of the company that I'm working at he's committed to personal development. He's avid about podcasts. He's investing in himself. He's doing all the things that I would say are the right things. And when I came on board to the company, he said, I'd really like to take this to all of our team members, all of our employees. How do we do that? And I said, well, what are you thinking about? He said, well, what if we were to take the books that you've read and how you're so passionate about those, and I'll pay for them. He owns the company. I'll pay for them for all the employees. And I said, wow, that's a big commitment. So we have, I think, 83 employees at this facility and a couple more that in our other facilities. So let's just say for round figures, 100 employees. And I've got another employee in the company, a team member who's equally as passionate, and she's really got a reading list, I think, that would rival ours. So I was pretty excited to have that additional support. So we've established a Trello board, which is commonly used for project management. And we're going to tackle the 7 habits, which kicks off the 6th of February. Everybody's placed their orders, and purchasing is ordering the books or the online or the Kindle, whatever version people choose to consume their content. It's completely voluntary. And much like we have at Rockhurst, where we have a discussion board where people post a question and then they have responses and you answer, we're basically doing the same thing and using the Trello board for that format. So again, walking the talk, right? It's one thing for the CEO to say, I want to do these things, but it's literally his money. It's his checkbook. So he said, you know what, I'm willing to pay. So just imagine if we have 100 people each month, and I said we would consume somewhere between 40 and 60 pages a week. And we'll take the natural breaks of the book in, but 7 Habits is over 400 pages long. So that book's going to be somewhere between the neighborhood of 8 or 9 weeks, but very, very excited to kind of kick this thing off. Ironically, and then I'll turn back over to Kelly, Extreme Ownership is the 3rd book in the series. So much like Dave, I read this book, I think 3 years ago, and I get to read it again here in a couple of weeks. So again, it's just very, very exciting to see a CEO leader committing himself to the development of his employees and basically saying, hey, you know what, if you're willing to invest in yourself, I'm willing to pay the bill. So here we go.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's exciting. And I loved 7 Habits when that first came out. That I was certified in that too. I don't know if I mentioned that the other day. Yeah, so I facilitated that quite a bit. Yeah, love it. Yeah, cool. That's awesome. Well, this one was an interesting one for me. I'm going to put the banner up for people can get the handout. So voyagecg.com/leadership books. You can go to that. It has the handout for today, along with the recordings of all the other books that we've done. And it has the list of our favorite books. That's in the on the right side. So we should look at your friends and see if there's your colleagues and see if there's any others we need to take a look at.
Absolutely.
And okay, so let's go into this one. So it was published in 2015, so that's why you both have read it already. And I think I was like the last person to ever read this book. So and it's part of the executive MBA curriculum this year. I don't know if it has always been, but it was part of it this year. So, or in the class of 24 has read it. So it's written by two Navy veterans, and they worked together in the Navy. Let's see, and they were combat veterans in the Iraqi War. They commanded and worked together on the SEAL teams, SEAL Team 3. They talk extensively in the book about specific battles that they fought together and separately in that war. After the Iraqi War, and when they left the Navy, they co-founded a consulting firm focused on high-performing teams. And they've co-authored 2 books. So this is one, and then the other one is The Dichotomies of Leadership. Jocko Willink, is that the right?
Willink.
Yeah. He received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Silver Star and the Bronze Star. And he was the rank of Lieutenant Commander. He has a BA in English from the University of San Diego. And I'm throwing that in because we talk about the education of these other erudite people sometimes, so I'm throwing his in there as well. And then Leif Babin is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and he was awarded the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. So before we go into the book, I do want to say that we appreciate their service, and just knowing that who they were before reading the book, you can appreciate that. And then the book goes into a lot of details about their experience. So that came through even more, knowing the behind the scenes and their decision making in a lot of those experiences. So we appreciate your service and respect for that. And then on a personal note, I just want to toss out there that my husband is a Vietnam veteran, and he's much older than me. So I was not around when he was a Vietnam veteran, but he has shared a little bit about that experience with me. So I did struggle reading this book, and I wasn't as enthralled with the combat scenes and some of the perspective about that. So I struggled with some of that. So I think that's just a point to consider if you're thinking about reading the book. I didn't know I was going to be sensitive to that until I started reading it. And so that kind of caught me off guard, but maybe keep that in mind if that's something that you might be sensitive to when you start reading it, because it is kind of detailed. I think that's all I need to say about that.
Well, I don't know if we're aware, but I actually deployed to Afghanistan in 2006. So
Right.
I didn't see any of the type of action that those guys did. So I don't in any way portray myself on their level. Those people are truly heroes and rock stars, and obviously just served my time with the Missouri National Guard. But having that military background, I could certainly relate to some of the vernacular and some of the acronyms and things like that. But it's a fascinating book, and to kind of see a firsthand recount. The other part that was interesting in the book, Chris Kyle, who was the sniper who was portrayed by Bradley Cooper in the movie American Sniper, was actually deployed with both Jocko and Leif in their deployment. So for those of you who've seen that movie, you can relate to some of what is portrayed in the book.
Yeah, that was interesting. And I did catch that a lot of what they said. So they would share a story about a situation in Iraq, and then they would share the lesson, and they called it a principle. That's kind of how every chapter is laid out. So they'd share a lesson, and I recognized a lot of those lessons in other management leadership books. And so and at the end they said, that they didn't invent this. They're reflecting back and on, some of the things they're tying their experiences to other lessons that they've learned in management books and leadership books. But I think this is it's a great summary or collection of a lot of management books in one. They don't say where they read it all, or a lot of them repeat the same things, but it is a good list of characteristics and traits and principles of good leaders. But the first one is that he starts off with. The book's divided into 3 parts, but even before he gets into that, he describes extreme ownership as taking the responsibility or extreme ownership for the failures within the team. And Jocko shares a story when he did that. So have you guys had experiences with that, or when somebody didn't do that, or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know I've probably experienced it like many in several different ways where, as a young leader, the first time something kind of went wrong, and to report up the food chain to, my director went wrong. And I was, kind of pretty quick to say, well, this guy working for me screwed up. And it was, well, that's your fault. What did you do about it? Did he need more coaching? Did he need more training? Did you need to keep a closer eye on this individual so that you ensured his success? And I went, oh, okay, I get it. So yeah, absolutely. As the lead, one of the quotes, I won't read the whole quote because it's pretty lengthy, but basically in the first chapter, he says, any team, any organization, all success and failure lands in the lap of the leader. And oftentimes, leaders are really good. All leaders are pretty good about taking credit for the successes, right? Standing there, collecting the award and the accolades. But when something goes wrong, oftentimes we've got those leaders that are pretty quick to point and say, well, it was so-and-so's fault. We had high turnover. We didn't anticipate market demand, blah, blah, blah. And that's what I really liked about this book, was that quote kind of set the tone for the book in the first chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was good. Bret, thoughts?
Yeah, I want to dovetail on that. I had kind of a similar experience. As my previous position, I was a sales leader and had a team, and our go-to-market strategy was to use sales agencies which manage the local market. So, as you would expect in that position, naturally there were always folks that were underperforming or not meeting plan, and so the conversation was, as you would expect, hey, where are we at relative to plan? And often they would deflect to, hey, the sales agency or the plant or fill rate, supply chain, whatever aspect of the business. And eventually it got around to the ownership aspect of it. And ironically, I always use the term the man in the mirror moment. And I don't think he quotes it exactly that way in the book, but he does have a look in I think the comment is look in the mirror. Mm-hmm. And that really, I think, personifies this idea of ownership. You own the results, you own your battle space, you own your span of control within the business, and ultimately you own the results. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't seek support or you can't seek additional guidance from people horizontally or vertically within the organization. But at the end of the day, what Jocko's preaching about and what he's talking about and passionate about is the fact that you own it.
And there are so many business examples too. So in the chapters, they have a story about Iraq, and then the principle of it, and then application to business. And there's a story where they go into an organization. And so several of those reflect back on that, even when that wasn't the main point they were trying to make. But one of them where the goals were missed and the leader wasn't getting it. And he was saying, well, what was your responsibility? And they're like, well, I wasn't doing that. And it took a couple times and a little bop upside the head practically to get them to really realize, oh, I should have done it. And then to admit he encouraged that leader to go in front of the board and say, yeah, this was my responsibility. And Jocko said, nobody ever does that. Right. So go in front of the board.
Well, and think about folks within the lower ranks of the organization, maybe entry-level managers or mid-level managers. We're programmed to look to our leaders to solve our problems. And in the role I've got, I've coached my direct reports. When you come into the office, you bring me a solution, don't bring me a problem. I mean, if I've got to solve all of your problems, I really have to question whether or not you're the right person. We've got great culture, great people, so very, very rarely does that ever happen. But it's this idea of, what are you willing to expect? What are you willing to tolerate? What are you willing to live with in terms of how you set the tone and how you set the standard? So I think it's spot on.
Yeah, those are 2 other points in this book too. Mm-hmm. What are you willing to tolerate, and then managing up and down. And so if you're bringing all your questions to your boss, that's so time consuming, and they don't have the capacity for that, or they need to be doing other things. So yeah, great point. Did you guys see that this week the CEO of Google came out, and the headline was, the Google CEO takes responsibility for the layoffs. And he is saying, I take full responsibility for the 12,000 layoffs, I think it was, and goes on and on about this rests with me. I don't know him personally or anything, but it feels like he thinks he's being this brave champion or something. And like, okay, but I didn't see any accountability in there, or
right.
And so it's kind of
the PR and communications people probably wrote the copy for him.
right. Like that, this whole thing really only works if you do something different going forward. And, if you're not, Microsoft, I posted the other day about them, and I think I mentioned on Monday in our pregame about that I was pleased with them because their exit, they're offloading at, I think it was like 10,000 people, or
10,000, right.
yeah, and so they were very generous in their exit packages, and their communication was spot on. It was pretty good case study for it, but then I found out they had a private concert of oh shoot, I forgot what it was now, but this like super Uber for the executives, some extra special thing. Like, come on now, they kind of ruined the whole thing they did for good graces. So accountability needs to be part of it all too. Okay, so let's go into the winning the war within. And I think that was such a great foundation of that's your character. Who are you? What are your core values? What are you bringing in to this leadership? And if you don't have a solid foundation, you're not going to be a great decision maker or calm in a crisis, all of those things. And he does talk about what Dave was saying, taking responsibility for your own job and everything else. One thing I thought was interesting was early on, he said I think this Dave might have been in that paragraph you were referring to about the leader is loyal to the team and to the mission. And so if there is someone underperforming, you work with them, you do what you can. And if they continue to underperform, your loyalty is to the team and the mission. And so they need to go, and you figure that out quickly. And I kind of wondered, what do you think do you see that today? I was wondering, how would that go over today? It seems like those kind of situations, not layoffs, but are underperformers kept around longer?
I don't think so. You hear this often. I'm not sure if you guys have experienced this, but I've heard it for years. It's the idea of train them up or train them out. And as a leader, that's one of your tough calls. And I've said that time and time again, that one of the most difficult things we'll ever have to do as a leader is go through that process and parting ways with an individual. And I think I might have made the comment in one of our previous broadcasts, oftentimes our future is determined when we're not in the room, which means, somebody else is having a conversation about us when we're not there to either defend ourselves or voice our opinion, but that's often what dictates our future. Now, obviously, our actions and behaviors long before that meeting ever take place probably play an outsized role in that. But given the current environment, and I don't know that that's any different, I look often at what's going on in the tech space, and I made the comment just the other day. I think as revenues grew during COVID, they naturally took the liberty or the license to grow expenses. And now as revenues decline, now they're obviously making those adjustments in expenses. And I like to take the approach of, hey, just because revenues grow doesn't mean there has to be a corresponding lift in expenses, so that when revenues do decline, hey, you're not going through this. So my daughter works, as you guys know, at a large company here in Kansas City, and her managers have conveyed to her pretty regularly that, hey, we've been preparing for this for some time, and everybody's safe. So I think it's a culture more than anything.
What do you think about do employees expect? I was thinking employees today expect more individual loyalty, be loyal to the person over the team and over the mission of the company, the purpose of the company.
I think every company is a little different in that regard. I don't know that you can make a blanket statement, Kelly. It's a good question, but I think it's every company and every culture and every leader's going to handle that a little differently. You could probably make an argument that there's a generational component to that, of what each generation does and how they look at it. But I don't think I can answer that one yes or no with any confidence.
Yeah. Dave, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say I've seen both, where working for a large corporation where people are free to move both upward and laterally, where oftentimes you'll see a leader move to a new vertical of the organization and bring people with them into that new vertical, and maybe that's just not a fit for them, and unfortunately I've seen it where you have to manage that individual out of the organization because they might have performed in one vertical, but the new one they're not performing, and then suddenly you hear, well, we've worked together for years. How could you do this to me?
Yeah.
And, one thing I try to impress upon all my students is, your first, 10 days on the job, I always joke, you get your big kid job, you need to ask your boss, the person that's doing your performance evaluation, what metrics am I measured against? What do you use to determine my success? Because those same metrics are what they use to determine failure. So if you've got that scorecard in front of you from the beginning, you play by those numbers. And to Bret's point, these are evaluated when you're not in the room, right? You've got executives, directors looking at KPIs, looking at balanced scorecards, and looking at performance metrics. And if you know what they're evaluating you on, you're already one step ahead of the game.
Hey, and as leaders, be clear about that to your people. Make sure they know. So if they don't ask, you should tell them.
Yep.
Yeah, make sure they're clear about that. Yeah, that's good. I think that's an interesting I liked that idea of be loyal to the team and to the mission, and just make sure everybody knows that's a priority. Another one in that section that stood out to me, and he mentions throughout the book, is about ego of the leader, and leave your ego aside. I think he looks at it as, or they look at it as, ego. Our ego would prevent us from taking responsibility for the mistakes and the failures. But I was also thinking there's a lot of other things that would prevent leaders from doing that besides ego. So Dave, you're laughing. So what are you thinking of besides ego?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming up in healthcare, it's just, gosh, mistakes are very costly, so what could happen to me if, I'm on the heels or I'm responsible for one of these mistakes, so yeah, ego, I think, drives a lot of that. But then there's just also that, wow, is this going to erode the confidence in the people I work with? And, you get back into that mindset of, if failure's okay, and I posted something earlier this week to that effect of, if we screw up, that's okay, but tell me why it happened and what are we going to do so it doesn't happen again? What do we change?
Yeah, self-preservation of our jobs, right? Yeah. Of retirement, I've seen that too, where it was people that weren't really high ego people, but they just wanted to coast along until retirement. So they weren't going to do anything really. It's just kind of coast along. So they didn't take credit or blame, probably more credit than blame, but it was personal financials toward retirement. And then also, they didn't want something to happen to their friends that they'd worked with for a long time, even if those people hadn't contributed in years, things like that too. Okay, let's go back to what Bret talked about. It's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. Experiences with that?
Well, I think it has to do with what your expectations are. And I have the same thing here in my being a new person in a new organization. And obviously the team here trying to understand what expectations are, how things will be conducted. And I think it's natural whenever you get a new leader to try to understand, hey, what are the expectations? How are we going to go about this? And as a leader, and he talks a lot about having a plan. This idea of planning is extensive throughout the book. And I think that speaks to coming in, and we've all done this as onboarded leaders. Hey, what's my 30, 60, 90-day plan? And what am I going to tolerate? What are my expectations? And I think that's really what that speaks to is if I'm willing to tolerate things, I think everybody, just human nature, right, goes to that path of least resistance or the least common denominator. And if you have high standards, and let's be honest, I mean, the Navy SEALs, Special Forces warfare, I mean, they have the highest standards. So, and you can see that personified throughout the book where there is nothing other than the best, and second place means you're the first dead guy kind of thing. So it's a very serious business, and you can see how Jocko takes it very seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a, kind of my personal mantra is, actions over words. People are going to notice your actions, what you actually say. And if you ever catch me out in public at a bar, ask me, I've got a more crude rendition of that. But if that person that is always up in front of people talking about your intentions, things you're going to go do, and you never actually produce any results, you can fool people for a while, but eventually you're compared to a used car salesman. And I came up in a family of a dad and a grandfather that were used car salesmen. And, you're eventually going to be managed out of the organization. So kind of what he talks about, what you preach versus what you do. It's what are your actions versus what are you actually telling me you're going to go do.
Yeah, I've seen that where like the top salespeople, sometimes they get special treatment. So because they're bringing in the revenue, and so they can treat people poorly and they can talk down to people. And one situation I was aware of, they lied on expense reports and took their family on trips and made up trips and did things like that. But they got away with it for years because they were the top salesperson, even though revenue wasn't great. And yeah, so I never could figure out why that was tolerated, except that the leader that tolerated it was just weak, wouldn't have a hard conversation with anyone, so would just go with the follow along and just let it go. But everybody knew, everyone that knew about it, which was in accounting, that's probably 10 people, that because they're all telling each other, and then other staff that knew about it, and then when they talk down to people, they tell people. So probably 30 or 40 people knew.
Sure.
And it's pretty hard to have to be the leader that goes out and talks about, we care about our people.
Yeah.
All except those 30 or 40 that
yes,
it's okay that this person talks down to. So that lack of congruency, that incongruency sets the culture there. Yeah, they did not do well either. Another thing, I don't know if we talked about this the other day, but was I saw in there was, what does winning look like? And does everybody know what winning looks like for the company? Does everybody agree in the company on what winning looks like? Does accounting know what winning looks like for the company? And does it look the same to them as it does to customer service, to marketing, to sales, to ops? And then he just mentions that, and then they talk about, do the leaders have to believe? Do the managers believe? I think this was a section called Believe. Are they true believers in the mission?
That's funny. I believe was where I was going here. So
okay,
our company runs a fiscal from May to April. So we're in the middle of the budgeting cycle right now. And, as in my role, I have to set the target, and then the business, all the sales support and sales has to basically determine how they're going to deliver the plan that's going to achieve that target. And as I came in and analyzed our capacity, our utilization of assets, and determined exactly where we're going to go, and laid out a 5-year financial plan, had to give that number to sales. And I've illustrated this a couple of times because I've told the story, but we've all seen the Roadrunner and the Coyote cartoons, right, where the color goes like this out of the person. And as I delivered the number to the sales team, that was what I saw, was this. And I was reading, Extreme Ownership, and I got to this section about belief, right, believing in the plan. And I wrote it down. I put it on a slide. I went out and grabbed a photo of Leif Babin from the internet, Google Images, and I threw it up in our ELT huddle that we have every Tuesday. And there was a point here, and I quoted it. I said, in order to convince and inspire others to follow and accomplish a mission, aka achieve a goal, the leader must be a true believer in the mission. Even when others doubt and question the amount of risk, the leader must believe. And the point I made is I can't sell the plan unless I truly believe. And as you pointed out, Kelly, he's got a whole section in the book about belief. And as leaders, imagine trying to sell an idea or sell a plan, or asking your team to, be put into harm's way or go do something difficult, exhibit extraordinary effort or energy. If you haven't truly bought in, if you don't believe, And I've read something about leaders, and I can't quote it, but basically it's this idea of asking people to move to some place that they can't imagine. And the CEO of the company talks a lot about vision casting, which this is a form of vision casting, right? I have to have a vision. And that's what I think that distinguishes leaders from managers. One of the first things I did when I got here was I asked everybody to go out and Google the difference between a leader and a manager. And I think what you often find is you really get down to the nitty gritty is there's a lot of folks that say they're leaders and they're probably managers.
Right.
So, and that's a very fine distinction. I get that, but leaders are rare people. I mean, now granted, I'm not talking about market makers like a Steve Jobs or a, Bill Gates. I mean, Elon Musk, those people are rare, but leaders they're not as rare as those folks, but they're everybody that says they're a leader, has leader in their title. I'm not sure they're acting or behaving exactly like a leader. And some of that has to go back with the ability to believe and the ability to cast a vision. Those are the leaders.
Yep.
And there's, we need managers too. So there's no glory in not doing that job. If you're supposed to be a manager, be the best manager. And then if you can be a leader on top of that, that'd be great. But we need managers too. Yeah. Oh shoot, what was my example? You set that goal, so you set this target, and then if nobody asks you questions about it and they just see this number and the color drains from them, and then they just think, oh, this guy's loony, and then they go badmouth and they talk about it and then they sabotage. I've seen that before, so then and then nothing can happen. So it's best.
Quite the contrary. What happened here, everybody dug in, rolled up their sleeves, and you cannot believe the amount of effort and energy and dedication and commitment from people saying, hey, you know what, we can do this.
Awesome.
It's been extraordinary. I've been so energized and so encouraged by the level of buy-in.
I just got chills.
Yeah, it's just been overwhelming to see people say, you know what, we can do this.
That is great.
And granted, you have to have a leader who casts the vision and believes, and then obviously secures the buy-in. Now, granted, it's early and we're, call it the honeymoon stage or call it whatever stage you want. And the numbers will start to come in when we get to fiscal 2023. But I couldn't be more impressed by the level of buy-in of the organization.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and he talks in the book about if you don't buy in, to ask questions and learn about it and understand, and then that should be okay so that you are able to buy in.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. Another thing he talks about in here, and they just kind of assume that everybody wants to be the best. And so then I was thinking maybe that's a generational thing too. And okay, Navy SEALs, those people want to be the best.
Yes.
But everybody's not a Navy SEAL. So does everybody really want to be the best?
So that again, I don't know if Kelly, if you read my mind or what's going on, but my next comment that I've got, McKinsey puts out all kinds of data. I'm inundated with McKinsey emails and studies and stuff. They're kind of prolific publishers is what I call them. And I don't know where I saw this, but McKinsey had an article that they did, and it was the early morning habits of CEOs. And they had surveyed all kinds of CEOs as far as what they do in the morning, what time they get up, what they do, whether they exercise. Some people like to read for the first hour they get up, but that ties into the book because there's a whole section in the book where Jocko speaks about the best SEALs, the best operators, and he's got this little tangent he goes off on where they go out on the town and tear it up, and they're still the first people into the office. And so as I was reflecting on that, I obviously looked at myself, and then I looked at several of the CEOs that I interact with and the behaviors and habits that they've got. They're all early risers. I mean, I'm typically in the office sometime between 5 and 6, very rarely ever after 6. So I'm rolling out of bed somewhere between 3:30 and 4 o'clock. And I usually exercise in the evening. Just about every CEO I know has a fitness routine where they're working out, they're taking care of themselves, they're exercising. Very rarely, now not every time, but very rarely do I find a CEO that's overweight. Jocko takes us down the path of discipline. Is kind of the category that he puts it into. But as I was reflecting on the call today, I said, hey, there's a call to action here. And to Kelly's point, not everybody wants to be a CEO. Not everybody will be a CEO. Not everybody should be a CEO. But if you want to move from station A, where you are today, to station B, and maybe even station C or D, you pick, right? You're the one who controls that path. And it's an opportunity for some self-reflection to say, hey, where do I fall in that continuum? Maybe I don't want to be a CEO and got to get out of bed at 3:45 in the morning, but Do I want to be director? Do I want to be a senior director? Do I want to be a manager? Do I want to be an assistant vice president? And all these things kind of dovetail together. So again, it's that man in the mirror moment, that gut check, that personal reflection to say, where do I fall in that continuum? What's within my reach? What's within my span of control? And what adjustments to my behavior do I want to make? And it kind of ties back into that comment that I made earlier about the Tony Robbins piece of, are these intentions? Are they resolutions? Or am I actually going to set a goal, and my goal and Jocko even goes on to say, hey, if you get up that early, you just added 2 hours of capacity to your day. And he goes on to say about how he was doing studies, he was educating himself, he was taking courses, getting certifications. So just ask yourself, if you get up 1 hour a day, that's 365 hours in a year, and you divide that out by, let's say 16 hours in a working day, you get almost 20 days back. I mean, imagine if I came to you and said, hey, if I gave you 20 days, what would you do with 20 days? I mean, you can't even imagine that. Yeah. And that's just the simple impact of getting up a couple hours early every day. I mean, those numbers aren't made up. I mean, that's not inspirational hyperbole. I mean, those are real numbers, folks. You get that many days back just by getting out of bed a little earlier. I mean, give it some thought.
Yep. That's one of my requirements in all of my coaching engagements, even if they come to me for something else, that we talk about their morning routine. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we talk about what they do in the morning, because how you set yourself up for your day affects everything. So your foundation. And so what's your morning routine? So I don't tell them what their morning routine needs to be, but if it's you hit snooze 5 times and, roll out of bed into your home office, then you got to do something different than that, because that's not going to be a high achiever. That's
well, and there's probably a very direct correlation there. I mean, right. You probably can ask somebody, hey, what's your morning routine? And based on what they tell you, you can pretty much pigeonhole them within the corporate world,
right?
Versus, and you probably can go
the other entrepreneurial world,
exactly. Yeah, but you can go the other way and say, hey, where are you at in terms of entrepreneurial corporate world? Yeah. And I bet you can back into what their morning routine is. Yeah. The correlations, I mean, it's almost a 1-for-1.
And even just personal satisfaction. Mm-hmm. So, Dave, what are your thoughts on this?
Mm-hmm. What really hooked me the first time a couple of years ago was, Jocko also has a podcast and an Instagram and a Facebook, and he's pretty much everywhere. But one thing he talks about is being, quote, on 99% of the time. So he gets up every morning at 4:30 and he posts a picture to social media of his watch. And every single morning it's between 4:30 and 4:32 every single morning. Gosh. And I've been following that. I don't look at his page every single day, but there has been one time where I saw he posted 5:30 and he said, was feeling pretty flat this morning, recharged a little bit. Now I'm ready to go. But he just truly embodies it, and has even posted, like when he's on the road giving seminars, he's posted pictures of his hotel room. And he said, there's no gym. He said, but I still got up at 4:30. I put a couple towels on the floor and I did some push-ups. I did some sit-ups, and I did it quietly at 4:30 this morning. So his accountability on what he does, you read about all these diets and everything where they say be on 80% of the time. And he talks about 80% becomes 75, becomes 70, becomes 50-50. He said, absolutely not. He said, every once in a while I splurge and I have a mint chocolate chip shake. He said, but on the front end of that, I earn it. I put in extra time at the gym and I really go after it. And ever since I went to grad school, I've always been that, I got up early because I needed, like to Bret's point, I needed those extra 2 hours in the day. And it's something that's kind of stuck. And my daughter still can't figure it out. She's like, Dad, why do you always get up so early? But yeah, I always love reading about leaders and that routine of how early do you get up every morning. And you don't see these people at the top that say, hey, I roll out of bed at 9 o'clock and, have a couple cups of coffee and get the day going.
And then they say, and I'm a night owl. They don't say that. They get up early.
Yep,
and they still might work at night, but they get up early.
You got it.
Yeah. And they don't work 14 hours a day for 30 years. Yep. They're not doing that.
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, and you mentioned his podcast. That's linked on the handout. There's a link to Jocko's TED Talk and his podcast on the handout. So for anybody watching, grab that from the website. Okay, let's go into another one. Oh, so many more, and I do want to watch our time. But in the he talks in the second part about the laws of combat and how there's internal struggles on the teams where the like the team leaders can be so focused on what their own responsibility is that you don't pay close attention to what the other team leaders' responsibilities are, when you should both be working together toward the same mission. So the internal conflict does more damage than the enemy on the outside. So like sales and marketing can be in conflict, or accounting and sales, accounting and everyone, HR and everyone.
Where he was going with that section was understanding commander's intent. And, going back to my military time, that was a big deal, right? When we got briefed on op orders. And again, to be clear, I'm not putting myself in the same camp as those two. Those guys are rock stars. But just having that understanding where they were going with that thread, it's just this idea of understanding the commander's intent, such that when things do go wrong, and obviously in the heat of battle they do, if I can understand commander's intent, I can pick up and execute when the bullets are flying and the dust is heavy, and that's really what happens. But that's kind of where he was going with that, was just this idea of understanding. And in the military, we always just talk about understanding my leadership obligation 2 levels up. In commercial space, I always say, hey, you need to be able to step in and fill your manager's job. And in the military, your manager could get, or your leader could get, eliminated pretty quickly. And all of a sudden you're the guy in charge, and it happens that fast often. So we were always instructed and trained to say, hey, be prepared to operate 2 levels up. And that was the mindset that we took.
Yeah. And this was under cover and move. So cover with your other person and then move, and they cover so you can move, then you cover so they can move. So if you work together, you can get more done. And then prioritize and execute, I thought was a fantastic point. And, under stress and ambiguity, the VUCA world that we're always in. And,
and I read that, I kept going back to the Gary Williams, the one thing. And I quoted that. In fact, he talk about in that book about the movie City Slickers, and there's a video about the one thing. And I went out on YouTube and grabbed that, and I threw that into a couple of presentations. I mean, having Jack Palance on the back of a horse and, got his finger like he does, I mean, it makes an impact.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought the way they describe all of that was good. And then what about decentralized command? They talked a lot about that and how critical that is. And the leader needs to know when to get involved. And so micromanaging isn't good. So decentralized command, and then the ones that take the command on, the task managers, need to believe in the mission and have confidence in their decisions.
Well, where I took that, and it's funny that because I applied that almost immediately. He started talking about how they function as teams, and we had fire teams, and we have squads, and we have platoons, and we have companies. That's how the military is organized. And he made the comment that, hey, to be effective, you really can only have somewhere between 4 and 6 direct reports. Yeah. And if you look at a leader and you look at the org chart and you say, hey, this guy's got 16 people reporting to him, you really got to ask yourself, how engaged can that leader be in the day-to-day functions of that particular department? Now, I'm not talking about an overt level of micromanagement, but just being present, being on, being there in that leadership role. And you really have to look at that org chart. And I literally read that this week, and we immediately made a few changes within the organization just to be more effective. And that goes not only at the leadership level, but think of frontline development. Yeah. Right? I've got frontline operators, and they need coaching, they need mentoring, they need development, and it's not all about at the executive level. So if I've got 9 direct reports and they all need coaching and development, maybe they're, think of college trainees, or again, my daughter being a first-year auditor. If she doesn't have anybody coaching her, she's completely lost. So yeah. I took that immediately out of the book and said, there's something here that we can work on.
That was good. Bret, any thoughts from you on that one?
Dave?
I meant Dave, sorry.
No, I'm good.
Okay. And we talked about part 3 already, sprinkled throughout on mission and the chain of command. And I don't like that term. I think that's very outdated. And if you try to use that in business today, saying that would not go over. Leading up and down and the dichotomy. So we touched on those things.
Well, the dichotomies, let me grab that one if I can. So
okay, yeah.
he calls it, and I don't think he uses the number 12. I actually counted them to see how many he had there, but there are 12 dichotomies of leadership, and they talk about what a leader should and shouldn't be. And the part that really resonated with me was he made the point that leadership can be taught, it can be learned, it can be trained, it can be developed. And I do this often. I reflect back on my career, and obviously it's been rather long. But I was a terrible leader, guys. I was a terrible supervisor. I was not a good communicator. I was a micromanager. I got into all kinds of things as a young supervisor that were none of my business. And I look back and I think to myself, I'm lucky I survived. And you know, if it wasn't for the benefit of some other leaders who were good leaders that really mentored me and took an interest in my future and an interest in my career, obviously I wouldn't be here where I'm at. So, you know, I've just been totally surrounded. So Jocko detailed how the SEALs teams are drilled and trained for years. He even made the comment about, hey, we drilled for years before we ever deployed to Iraq. And that drilling and that mentoring is kind of a form of management training. And then he also noticed, he even used the term mentorship from different leaders. So he was very keen on that. So I really kind of, that stuck me to say, hey, and I think where I was reflecting on this is to say, as young and junior people look at leaders, they say, you know what, they're just born that way, or they've always been great leaders, or they've always been good at that, or isn't he a great communicator? He's always had that skill. He's just blessed, or he's gifted. You know, not so much. All this stuff can be taught. It can all be trained. It can all be learned. You know, you have to have a passion and a thirst and a desire for it. But just know that if your station in life today is not what you want it to be, you're not where you're at, there's hope. And I'm not a big fan of the word hope, as everybody knows, but you know, it's where Pastor Adam always says, you know, the last thing is not the worst thing. That's his thing at church. And that's true. I mean, where you're at today is not where you will ultimately end up. And you go back to Marshall Goldsmith, you know, what got you here won't get you there. And it can happen, and it can happen for anybody. It happened for me. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. So that's my call to action to everybody, to reflect, put together a goal, implement a plan, and execute. It can happen.
And the action with that too, adding on to the mentors and all of that, is being open to feedback.
Right.
So that I had so many mentors early in my career that they just get, and actually throughout my career, that they would pull me aside and give me the tiniest little bit of feedback that I just welcomed and ate it all up. And I think that's a huge thing, and not to be defensive about it or reject that, you know, just receive all of that. Yeah.
The last point I'll throw out, I know we're already on part 3, is, you know, he makes a point that leaders are not infallible. And he talks extensively about how, you know, leaders don't have all the answers. And if you are a leader and you think you've got all the answers, you're wrong. And if you aspire to be a leader and you think that you have to have all the answers to be a leader, again, you're wrong. The good leaders recognize what their blind spots are. You know, we use the term a lot in interviews about superpowers. I'm not as fond of that as some people are, but you know, recognize what your strengths are, recognize what you're good at, and recognize what you can go from good to great. And the things that you're bad at, don't worry about it, right? Surround yourself with people that are good at those things.
Yeah.
You know, I can tell you, I can't draw a stick person. So if you want me to put together a web design class, or you want me to do marketing, I ain't your guy. But you know what? There's a whole lot of things that I can do really, really well. But I know that, and I recognize my fallacies. I recognize my blind spots, and I'm smart enough and have enough depth and enough maturity to go out and find people that are good at those things, and we complement one another. So he makes a lot of points about that. And I think, again, that's my call to action to leaders, to say, you know what, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to know everything, but you know what, you do have to be smart enough to recognize where your gaps are and go find people who can fill that in. So whether that's a board of advisors, whether that's a board of directors, whether that's just a group of mentors, can be inside your company, outside your company, just know that, again, we're reinforcing that value of networking and that idea of knowing that you don't have to do everything.
Yeah, that's extreme ownership of who you are.
Exactly.
Dave, final thoughts from you about the book?
Again, a great book. Like I said, I've read it twice. Not to deter anybody, the only word of caution I would give is, since I think he's a fantastic storyteller. It is heavily laden with military acronyms. He does a fantastic job of defining each one of those.
Yeah.
But what I have found was, I not coming from a military background, he would define something and then 8 pages later use the acronym again. And I would go, oh, dang it, I forgot what that was. So I'm usually a digital reader, so it's usually on my Kindle or the audio version. So this one I read on the Kindle, and when I read it for the first time, I actually had to keep a little note card where I defined out what each one of those acronyms were. Not a reason to not read the book. Just that was kind of one thing. Military is very heavy in acronyms. Not being military myself, but growing up in a military family, I often sat at the dinner table and went, "What exactly does that mean?" So yeah, again, great book. I thought he was a fantastic storyteller. Great writer. I always compared a lot of what he was talking about, going, wow, I've never really had it that bad, because I've had some pretty rough days, but nobody has ever been shooting at me while I was trying to solve a problem. So again, my hat's off to anyone that's defended our nation and gone through that. So I never have, and hope I never have to.
Yeah, right. For sure. My last thought I wanted to share is that there is a difference between leading in the military and leading in business. And so in the military, those employees can't just leave. They can't just find a new job, and they don't like something, so and they're not being recruited away. And I guess there could be some of that, but it's not the same. And another big difference is in the military, they are not concerned about your personal motivations like leaders in business need to be, and that employees expect of their business leaders. So I think there's some of that is missed in the book and in their views. And then in business, it's that works for them. It's not, most of us aren't dealing with matters of life and death in business. Some in healthcare there would be, and in research, I think in some, but most of the time it's not. So these practices can certainly be implemented in most of the companies. I mean, I didn't think of anything that he brought up that I thought, oh no, that would never work in business.
Right.
I think that while there are differences, these are common practices in business. So I would encourage people to.
Well, I even made the note that although this is kind of business focused, these things apply in personal relationships. They apply in parenting relationships. I mean, these are more about relationships and two people interacting, whether they're organizations within business. But I kept going back to the fact that this isn't just about business. It's just about the military. It's how you interact with your partner, your spouse, your children, friends. I mean, these have ramifications above and beyond that.
Mm-hmm. I think he mentioned that in the preface too, that he'd heard from, since this book came out, that he'd heard from spouses that had worked and had helped their families too. So,
I made a note here, that throughout the book, there's tons of mentions about trust. And obviously we've talked extensively about trust. We've done books on trust. And he also talks about effective communication. And I have a note, we haven't done a book on communication, but as we progress and move down our journey with one another, it's not out of the realm of possibilities of doing communication. So, and as far as titles go, next month is Patrick Lencioni's Working Genius. We're going to do that in February. And ironically, I was listening to his podcast last night, and Kelly's good enough to share the data with Dave and I as far as our numbers. But Lencioni's Working Genius podcast just went over 1 million downloads. And I thought, I know what our numbers are, and we're far from 1 million. But Patrick and his co-hosts on the podcast last night were pretty proud of the fact that they had passed 1 million downloads. So pretty interesting to see what kind of traction he's getting done. And granted, I mean, we're way off of that, but that's okay.
But we've never paid for advertising. This week, I posted it yesterday to promote it.
Right.
So, we're not.
Lencioni, he's an expert on organizational health and organizational behavior, organizational wellness, and he does a very good job. So I'm confident that one will be a good read. And for those of you who have read his stuff, I mean, his stuff moves pretty quickly. I mean, Extreme Ownership is some pretty heavy content. So we're on Thursday, February 23rd at 4 p.m. and continue to encourage everybody to invest in yourselves. I say it all the time. It's the best investment you'll ever make.
And we will see you then, everyone, on February 23rd. So thank you for joining us if you were here live. Thank you for watching if you watched the video. And we will see you soon. Thank you, Bret and Dave.
Thanks, everybody.